The camera was a cheap thing, salvaged from a Concorde dumpster, and Simon Roble knew it would die before his lungs did. But that was all right. He only needed it to last long enough to show the colony how a free man chose to end. He set it on the windowsill of the gutted apartment block, angled it so the smog-orange sky filled the frame behind him, and pressed the little flashing rune that meant the buoy was eating his signal and spitting it across the planetary grid. 43 minutes to midnight, local. 43 minutes until the new year that the Vexthaler Concord had renamed Compliance Day. He had announced his suicide at noon. By now, half of Kepler 9 was watching, and the other half was pretending it wasn't. "My name is Simon Roble," he said, and his voice was a tired thing, sandpapered by years of yelling at crowds that no longer came. "I was a pilot for the Outer Reach Volunteers. I am 38 standard years old. At midnight, I am going to step off this roof, and I am going to do it on this signal, so that you can all watch me decide something for myself for the last time. I am not doing it because I am afraid. I am doing it because the Concorde cannot have me, not my memory, not my hands, not my eyes. They will not put a collar on me. They will not strip me to nothing and call me useful." He thought about saying more. He had drafted speeches for weeks about the slave camps the Concorde called cognitive salvage centers, about the chemical called vaccina that the collars pumped through human nervous systems, dulling the senses to gray static and erasing memory like a wet rag across a board, about neighbors who had been taken in the night and returned a month later as bald, glass-eyed labor units, unable to recognize their own children. He had written all of it. He found, sitting in front of the lens, that he did not want to spend his last hour explaining what every person watching already knew. So he just lifted a chipped enamel cup of bad vodka and said, "Na zdrowie." Then he drank, and he went down the stairwell to the alley to throw the bottle away. That was where he found her. The dumpster behind the building was a Concorde-issued composite unit, big enough to swallow a transport pod, and the lid had been left ajar. A bare foot stuck out of it. He almost walked past. He had walked past worse. The colony left bodies in alleys the way Earth had once left litter. But the foot twitched, just a small spasm of toes, and Simon Roble, who had decided 40 minutes ago that he was finished with the world, stopped walking. He climbed up onto the dumpster's edge and looked in. She was naked under a thin foil sheet, curled tight around herself like something that had tried to hide inside its own ribs. Her head had been shaved with a dull blade. Old razor cuts crossed her scalp in thin brown lines. Around her neck was the collar. Black ceramic, 2 little blue pinpricks of light blinking on the housing, the slow drip, drip, drip of a vaccina cartridge still feeding into the soft place under her jaw. Her eyes were open. They were not seeing anything. "Oh no," Simon said. "Oh no, 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 no." He had been about to die in a way he had chosen. Now he was being asked to live in a way someone else had chosen for him, and he hated the unfairness of it for a single furious second, and then he reached in and lifted her out. She weighed almost nothing. He carried her up 6 flights with her cheek against his collarbone, and her breath was so shallow, he kept stopping to make sure it was still there. In the apartment, the camera was still recording. He had forgotten. He set her on the mattress, and he turned to the lens, and the words came out flat and tired. "Plans change," he said, and he reached over and snapped the rune off. The collar was the first problem. It was the only problem he could solve quickly, so he started there. He had a friend, once, a Concorde defector named Halmar, who had taught him how the cartridges fit. Halmar had been taken 3 years ago and returned as a custodial unit. Simon had visited him in the work camp twice and then stopped, because the thing wearing Halmar's face looked at him with the same mild interest it looked at a wall. But Halmar had taught him, in the before time, about the little release valve on the underside of the housing, and how to bleed a cartridge dry without triggering the locator beacon. He worked for an hour in the kitchen with a magnifier and a pair of dental picks. She lay on the mattress and breathed and did not move. The blue lights on her collar slowed and then went dark, one by one, like dying stars. When the last one winked out, Simon sat back on his heels and realized his hands were shaking too badly to put the picks down. He covered her with a real blanket. He sat in the chair by the window. He waited. Hours later, just before dawn, she opened her eyes and saw him. She did not scream. He had expected screaming. Instead, her mouth opened a small, soft amount, and her fingers reached up and touched her own lower lip, as if checking that the mouth was really there. Then she touched the blanket. Then she touched the back of her own hand, slowly, with great seriousness, as if she had just discovered a marvelous new species and wanted to be sure she had counted all its parts. "Hey," Simon said softly. "Hey, you're safe." She looked at him. She made a small sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when they have been gone for a long time and have not yet remembered how voices work. He brought her water. She watched the cup as he carried it across the room, and her eyes tracked it the way a baby tracks something bright. He held it to her mouth. She drank, and then she stopped drinking, and her face did a thing he was not prepared for. It crumpled. Tears spilled out of her, fat and silent, and she pressed both hands flat over her own mouth as if she could not believe what was inside it. "It's just water," he whispered. I know. He understood then that she had not tasted anything in a very long time. The vaccina killed the tongue first. They said it was kindest that way. He went to the kitchen and tore a piece of black bread off the half-loaf on the counter, and he came back and put it on her palm. She looked at it. She looked at him. She raised it to her face and smelled it, and she made the small, wounded noise again, and then she bit it and chewed it. And the look on her face was the look of a person remembering that the universe had once been good. He turned away to give her that moment to herself. He found himself crying in the doorway of his own kitchen, which was inconvenient and also fine. When he came back, she had finished the bread and was looking at her own fingers in the gray morning light, turning them, watching the shadows move across her knuckles. He sat on the floor by the mattress, not too close. "I'm Saman," he said. He pointed at himself. "Seaman." She watched his mouth. "Shh," she said. The sound was rough and unfamiliar in her throat. "Min." "Close enough," he said, and he smiled, and her face did something complicated, and then smiled back, lopsided, like a child copying. He thought of names she could be called. He looked at the dark of her irises, at the little blue lights of the collar he had killed, and he said, "Blue, I'm going to call you Blue until you find your own name. Is that okay?" She did not understand the question, but she touched the collar with 2 fingers, and she nodded, very slowly, the way a person nods when they are agreeing to something they do not yet know the shape of. That first day was a slow inventory of the world. He showed her things, one at a time, the way you might show a wedding ring to a child. A spoon, a piece of dried fruit, the texture of the wool blanket. A scratched holocube he had not turned on in 2 years, which lit up in his palm and projected a small wobbling image of his mother and his sister at a beach he did not let himself name anymore. Blue watched the little blue figures move, and her mouth fell open and she reached for them with her finger. And her finger passed through the light, and she laughed. The laugh was a startled honking thing, broken, like a bird that had forgotten how its own wings worked. She laughed again to hear the sound of it. Then she laughed because she had laughed. Simon turned away and rubbed his face with the heel of his hand and pretended for a moment that he was checking the door. She slept 18 hours that night. She slept like a person catching up on 3 years. He sat in the chair and watched her and did not sleep at all. Every so often her hand would jerk in her sleep, the small involuntary spasm of a person whose body was remembering things her mind had not given it permission to remember yet. And her mouth would shape a syllable in the dark and then go quiet again. He watched her, and he thought, I was going to be dead by now. I was going to be on a sidewalk by now. He thought it over and over, and he could not make it feel real, because it had been a different man who decided that, and that man had not yet met this girl, and now that man did not exist. In the morning, she discovered that the window opened. He had not let her go near it. The window faced the alley, and the alley faced the world, and the world had a face he did not want her to see yet. But he was making bad tea in the kitchen, and when he came back into the room, she was standing in front of it with her hand on the glass, and her cheek pressed against it, and her whole body had gone still in the way of a deer that has heard something far away. He started toward her, alarmed. She shook her head. She did not turn around. "Wind," she said. The word came out whole. It was the first whole word she had said. "Wind." He stopped where he was. He listened. The wind was moving across the alley with the small dry sound of a hand brushing along a wall. "Yes," he said. "On," she said. She put her palm flat to the glass. "On." Skin. She had felt the cold through the window. He had not known the glass was thin enough to feel through. She had known it because she had been somewhere even colder for a very long time, and now everything was a temperature she could read. He stood behind her, careful not to crowd, and he said, "Tomorrow. Tomorrow we open it." She nodded. She did not move her hand for a long time. They opened it the next day. She put her whole face into the wind, and she stayed there, eyes closed, for almost 3 full minutes. When she stepped back, her cheeks were wet, and she was smiling, and she did not say anything, and she did not need to. The Inquisitor came on the 3rd day. His name was Corin Vass, and he was a tall, pale thing in a long gray robe, jointed wrong at the elbows, with a face like a worn coin. He walked down the corridor with 2 enforcer drones humming behind him, and he knocked on Simon's door with the polite mechanical patience of a creature that had infinite time and no soul. Simon had hidden Blue under the floor. He had cut the panel 3 years ago, back when he still believed in surviving. There was a crawl space beneath, 2 meters by 1, lined with old foam. She lay in it now, with a finger pressed against her lips because he had shown her that gesture, and she had understood it instantly, which had surprised him, and then not surprised him at all, because some things were older than memory. He opened the door. "Citizen Roble," said Corin Vass. His translator made his voice flat and womanish. "You broadcast a notice of self-termination. The notice was not completed. The Conquered is concerned for your well-being." "I changed my mind," Simon said. "Reconsideration is a permitted neural state." The Inquisitor's head tilted. The black bead eyes did not blink because they could not. "May we enter and verify?" "No." A pause. The drones behind Corin Vass shifted on their gimbals. Corin Vass folded his 2 long hands. "We are aware," he said, "that a salvage candidate, designation BU/0073, was disposed of in this district on the night of your broadcast. Disposal occurred due to a cartridge malfunction. The unit was logged as terminated. However, our recovery sweep did not locate remains." "Sounds like a paperwork problem," Simon said. "Citizen Roble," said Corin Vass very gently, "humans who attempt to harbor recycled units do not retain their citizenship or their cognition. We would not wish to find ourselves processing you. You were, I am told, a pilot of considerable skill." "I was. It would be a waste." "It would," Simon agreed, and he smiled with all his teeth showing. "Was there anything else?" The Inquisitor looked at him for a long moment. Simon felt the look the way you feel a hand pressing on a bruise. Then Corin Vass bowed, the smallest mechanical inclination, and turned and walked away down the corridor with his drones behind him. Simon closed the door. He locked it. He went to the floor panel and lifted it. Blue was looking up at him from the dark, and her eyes were wet, and she was holding the same finger to her lips, and she had not made a sound. "You did good," he whispered. "You did so good." She reached up. He pulled her out. She did not let go of his hand for a long time. They left that night. He packed in 12 minutes. A coat for her, 2 sizes too big. The dental picks. A pulse cutter. The chipped enamel cup, because he had drunk 1,000 bad mornings out of it, and he was not leaving it behind for the Conquered to inventory. He cut his own hair short with a kitchen knife, and then, because he could not stop himself, he ran the blade twice across the back of his neck until a thin red line stood up across the skin like a brother to her collar mark. He did not know why he did it. He did it. The plan was Tausati, the neutral zone. 240 light hours away by short jump if you could get on a ship. 12 days by overland if you were going to do it the way they were going to do it, which was on foot and in stolen cars, and once briefly in the cargo hold of a refrigerated meat hauler that was carrying meat that had once been someone's cousin. Blue learned fast. That was the thing nobody had ever told him about the recycled. They were not gone. They were under. The vaccina had not destroyed her, only smothered her. And now that the cartridge was dry, she was clawing back up through layers of fog at speed. By the 2nd day on the road, she knew 30 words. By the 4th, she was making jokes, small clumsy ones, mostly about the way Simon snored. By the 6th, she had remembered the name her mother had given her, which she whispered to him in the dark of an abandoned grain silo, while it rained on the corrugated roof, and which he is not telling you, because it was hers, and the Concord is listening. He kept calling her Blue. She liked it. She said it suited her better than the other one anyway, now. They moved at night. They slept in basements and culverts, and once memorably, inside a hollowed-out billboard advertising a brand of synthetic bread that had not existed for a decade. Corin Vass was hunting them. They knew this because the regional broadcast had stopped naming Simon as a concerned citizen requiring wellness intervention and started naming him as a fugitive harboring stolen property, which was at least more honest. She got better at things every day. It was the strangest thing to watch. He had grown up being told that the recycled were gone, dust inside a body, that what the vaccina took did not come back. He had believed it. Everyone had believed it. Halmar had been gone, and he had known Halmar was gone the way you know a candle is out. But Blue was not Halmar. Blue had been collared, perhaps, for only a few months. Blue had been thrown out before the chemical had finished its work. And every day on the road, her vocabulary doubled, and every day her hands remembered another small skill, and on the 5th night she sat down by the fire and took the pulse cutter apart and put it back together correctly without him showing her, and looked up at him with an expression that said, "I think I used to fix things. I think that used to be me." "What did you do?" he asked, "before?" "I don't know yet." She turned the cutter over in her palm. "Something with my hands, something that broke. Something I made not broken. You'll remember. Maybe." She did remember in pieces. The way a tide brings things back. She remembered a brother. She remembered a kitchen with yellow tile. She remembered an exam she had failed and an exam she had passed. She remembered being afraid of a particular kind of bird as a child and not being able to say why. She did not remember the arrest. She did not remember the camp. She did not remember the collar going on. He was glad of that. He hoped she never would. On the 6th night, she asked him about himself. "See," she said. "Why were you going to?" She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. He told her. He told her about the friend named Halmar and the wife he had once almost had who left for Earth 6 months before the Concorde came and never wrote back. He told her about a city he had loved called Noik Gdańsk that did not exist anymore because the Concorde had renamed it District 12. He told her about losing the will to fly, which was the first thing to go, and then losing the will to organize, which was the second, and then losing the will to wake up, which was the third. He told her about the apartment, the camera, the chipped enamel cup. She listened. She did not interrupt. When he was done, she reached across the small fire and she put her hand on his hand, and she said, "Good thing I was in the trash." He laughed. He could not help it. It came out of him like something breaking the right way for once. "Good thing," he agreed. She did not let go of his hand for a while. On the 7th day, the ingenuity began to show. A Concorde checkpoint, 3 drones and a soldier, blocking the only bridge across the Kepler River. Simon watched it for an hour from a stand of dead birch. Then he climbed up to a wrecked transmitter tower and rewired its emergency klaxon to play the Concorde's own evacuation tone on a 30-second loop. The drones, programmed to respond to that frequency, peeled off the bridge in formation and moved toward the tower. The soldier, alone and confused, lasted about 90 seconds against a man who had spent 3 years rehearsing exactly this in his head with no one to do it to. Blue walked across the bridge with her hand in Simon's. The river ran black and slow underneath. She looked down at it and laughed because she had remembered, sometime in the last day, that she had loved water as a child, and she had not known she still remembered loving it until she saw a river again. On the 9th day, she saved them. They had taken refuge in the back of a chapel that the Concorde had decommissioned but not yet demolished. The stained glass was mostly gone. Pigeons lived in the rafters. Blue had been sitting in a pew running her fingers along the carved back of it, tracing the grain, when she went very still and held up her hand. Simon froze. He listened. He heard nothing. "Tone," she whispered. "Tone. Low, under the floor." He pressed his ear to a flagstone. He still heard nothing. But Blue's senses had come back sharper than his ever were. The way a thing that has been kept in the dark and then released into the light sometimes sees a wider spectrum than it had before. And she could hear the low thrum of a Concorde ground sweeper drone moving along the buried cable conduits beneath the chapel floor. He had not even known they used those. She pulled him by the wrist out the side door and into the bell tower stairwell, and they crouched at the top, and 90 seconds later, a black blunt-nosed scanning unit pushed up through a service hatch in the nave and swept the empty pews and turned in slow, contemptuous circles and finally went away. She looked at him in the dark of the tower. "I used to fix things," she said. "I think I used to fix machines like that one." "I think you used to," he said. "Do everything." She liked that. She kept that. He saw her tuck it away inside herself like a folded note. On the 10th day, they nearly died. It was a stupid thing. Simon's fault. He had stopped at a roadside cache to refill a water can, and he had not seen the proximity tag glued to the underside of the lid. The drones came in low and fast, and there was nowhere to go but a half-collapsed agricultural barn at the edge of a fallow field. He shoved Blue inside ahead of him and pulled the door, and they crouched in the dark while the drones circled and circled, and the field outside lit up white from their searchlights. She was shaking. He held her. Her cheek was against his chest, and her hands were balled into his coat, and he could feel her counting her own breaths to keep them quiet. He stroked the back of her bald scalp with the flat of his palm, and the stubble there was just beginning to come in soft. And somewhere very deep inside him, a thing he had given up on 3 years ago turned its face toward the light. "Listen," he whispered. He hummed it first, low, because she had told him 2 nights ago, that her mother used to hum to her, and she could not remember the song. Listen. He hummed an old lullaby his grandmother had hummed at his cradle on a different world a long time ago. 3 notes, 4, the simplest thing in the universe. He did not know the words anymore. He hummed it against the top of her head while the drone searched and the searchlights moved and the night did its slow, impossible work. She did not cry. She listened. After a long time, the drones moved on. She fell asleep against him in the dark of the barn with the hum still going in his throat. He kept it going until his voice cracked. On the 11th day, they met the smuggler. His name was Kovacs, and he flew a battered hopper that he kept hidden in a salt flat outside the border zone. He had agreed for a stupid amount of platinum that Simon did not have, and was going to have to lie about, to fly them the last 100 kilometers to the Tau Ceti gate where the neutral courier ships docked. Kovacs had 1 eye and 4 fingers and the air of a man who had decided a long time ago that the universe owed him exactly nothing, and he was going to take it anyway. She's recycled, Kovacs said, looking at Blue. She was.
Inquisitor's got a personal flag on her file.
You know that?
I figured.
Kovacs sucked his teeth. He looked at Blue. He looked at Simon. He looked at the chipped enamel cup hanging on Simon's belt, the one with the faded blue rim, and something complicated moved behind his one good eye. My sister, he said after a while. 6 years ago. I'm sorry, you should be. You all should be. Kovacs spat in the dust. Fine, get in. We launch at moonset. And keep her head down. The hopper's old. The shielding's worse. She lights up like a flare on any scan that knows to look for a Vaccina ghost. They climbed in. The hopper smelled of grease and synth tobacco and old vomit. Blue pressed herself against Simon's side. He could feel her heart through her coat. They lifted off into a sky the color of wet iron, and Kovacs flew them low, so low the underside of the hopper hissed against the tops of the dead pines, and the world ran underneath them like a film on bad tape. They almost made it. The interceptor came out of low orbit in a screaming dive, and Simon, who had been a pilot once, knew the shape of the maneuver before he knew the shape of the ship, and he was already moving when the first cannon round took out their starboard lifter. The hopper spun. Kovacs swore in a language Simon did not speak. They came down hard in a tidal flat 2 kilometers short of the gate, and the impact threw Blue forward against the console, and Kovacs was not breathing when Simon pulled himself up out of the smoke. He pulled Blue out of the wreck. She was bleeding from a cut above her eyebrow, and her left wrist was wrong, but she was alive. She was alive. She was looking at him with the wide-open seeing eyes of a person who had decided not to die today either. The interceptor was landing 100 meters out. He could see Corin Vass already stepping down the ramp, slow, unhurried, the long gray robe catching the wind. The gate was 2 kilometers away across open mud. There was no cover. There was no plan. There was Simon Roble, and there was Blue, and there was a chipped enamel cup hanging on his belt, and there was the lullaby still humming somewhere at the back of his throat, and he thought, very clearly, the way he had not thought clearly in 3 years. All right then. He pulled the pulse cutter from his coat. He turned to Blue, and he took her face in his hands, careful of the cut, and he said, "You are going to run. You are going to run in a straight line, and you are not going to look back. The gate has automated processing. It will take you. They cannot refuse a recycled human who reaches neutral ground. There's a treaty. Do you understand me?" "See," she said. Her voice was raw. "See, no. Yes. See with. No, sweetheart. I have to make him stop. I have to make him stop looking. Just for a minute. That's all you need. Just a minute. Okay?" She was crying. She did not let go of his coat. Her hand was knotted into the fabric over his ribs, and she was shaking her head, and her mouth was making the shape of words she had not yet remembered. He pried her fingers off, gently. He pressed the chipped enamel cup into her hand. "For when you get there," he said, "drink something good. Promise me." She looked at the cup. She looked at him. The expression on her face was not the face of the thing he had pulled out of a dumpster. It was a person. It was a whole person. It was the universe doing its slow, impossible work in real time, in front of him, in the wind off a black mud flat with an alien inquisitor 100 meters away. "Run," he said. She ran. He turned, and he walked toward Corin Vass with the pulse cutter loose in his hand. The inquisitor had stopped. The 2 enforcer drones were lifting off, beginning to bank wide, beginning to track the small running figure behind him. Simon raised the cutter, and he shot the first drone out of the air. It was a stupid shot. The cutter was not made for it. The range was wrong. The charge was too low, and he had been a pilot, not a marksman, and he should have missed. He did not miss. The drone came apart in a shower of black plastic and dropped into the mud. Corin Vass paused. "Citizen Roble," said the flat translated voice. "This will not accomplish your aim." "I'm not aiming," Simon said. "I'm buying." The second drone was banking around for a pass. Simon walked toward Corin Vass, and he fired again and missed and fired again, and the drone came apart in a sloppy spray and dropped. 2 drones down. The Inquisitor reached slowly into his robe. Behind Simon, the small figure was running and running and running. "You are a waste citizen," said Corin Vass. "You took my pilots," Simon said. He kept walking. "You took my neighbors. You took a man named Halmar who taught me how to fix a cartridge. You took my city. You took her. You did not take me. Listen carefully. You did not take me." He fired one more time. It went wide. Corin Vass had his sidearm out now. The Inquisitor's hand was very steady. The first shot took Simon in the thigh and folded him down onto one knee in the mud. He looked back. She was still running. She was small in the distance, a dark smudge against the gray, the chipped enamel cup glinting once in her hand. The gate was still a long way off. She was still running. "Good girl," he whispered. "Good girl. Don't look back." The second shot took him in the chest. He went down sideways into the mud, and the cold of it on his cheek was a surprise. And the sky was the color of wet iron. And somewhere very far away he could hear the gate's automated processing tone. The one that meant a refugee had reached the boundary line. The one that meant the treaty had triggered. The one that meant the conquered could no longer touch. Corin Vass was standing over him. The pale face was tilted. The black eyes did not blink because they could not. "You will be reclaimed," the Inquisitor said. "Your tissues are still useful. Your cognition will be processed. There is no waste." Simon Roble, who had been 38 standard years old, who had been a pilot, who had been 3 days from killing himself, who had pulled a girl out of a dumpster on a smoggy night in a colony nobody cared about, smiled at the Inquisitor through the blood in his teeth. "You don't understand us," he said. "You never did. You never will." Corin Vass tilted his head the other way. "Explain," Simon laughed. It hurt very badly to laugh. He did it anyway. "You think you take everything," he said. "You take our memory. You take our senses. You take our names. You think that empties us. But you don't understand the last thing. The last thing is that we give. You take and we give. That's the difference. That's the whole difference. You take her, I give her back. You take my city, I give it a song. You take my life, I give it to a girl I found in the trash. You can't process that. You can't put a collar on that. You can take everything I am and you still won't have me, because the part of me that matters I already gave away." The Inquisitor was silent. In the distance, the gate's tone changed. A high, clear sound, 3 notes, like a lullaby. Acceptance. A refugee had passed through. Simon closed his eyes. He was still smiling. She did not look back. She did what he had told her to do, because the last clear thing his voice had said was run, and she ran with the chipped enamel cup clutched against her chest, and her bare feet bleeding into the cold mud, and her lungs full of fire. She did not look back when she heard the first shot. She did not look back when she heard the second. She did not look back when the automated processing arch lit up red and then green around her, and the courteous Tau Ceti voice said, "In flat treaty standard, refugee accepted. Welcome to neutral territory. You are safe." She stopped on the other side of the line. Only then did she turn. She could see very small, a gray figure standing over a smaller figure in the mud. She could see the interceptor's lights. She could see, beyond it, the dirty gray of the world she was leaving. She lifted the chipped enamel cup. She did not have water in it. She lifted it anyway. "Nostrawi," she whispered, in a language she had not known she knew until this moment, and her voice came out clear and unbroken and entirely her own. She drank the empty cup. Then she turned and she walked into the neutral zone, and she did not stop walking. And somewhere inside her chest the lullaby kept going. 3 notes. 4. The simplest thing in the universe. The thing he had given her. The thing they could not take. There is a courier station on Tau Ceti now where a woman works the late shift. She is not young anymore. Her hair has grown in dark and thick, and she keeps it short. There is a thin, pale line around her neck that she does not hide. She speaks Standard and Polish and 3 other languages she taught herself from old recordings. And she has a name, her own name, which she gives freely to anyone who asks. On the shelf above her workstation there is a chipped enamel cup with a faded blue rim. She drinks her morning coffee from it. She drinks her evening vodka from it. Once a year, on the night the colony calendar marks as Compliance Day, she fills it with cold, clean water, and she carries it out to the observation deck, and she lifts it toward the dark patch of sky where Kepler 9 used to be visible before the Concorde shuttered the relay buoys. She says Nozdrowi to the dark. She drinks. She goes back to work. She is not alone out there. There are others. She finds them sometimes, the recycled, the ones who clawed their way back up out of the fog, the ones who remember a humming in the dark when nothing else made sense. She gives them coffee. She gives them bread. She tells them, in the simplest words she has, the thing that took her a long time to understand, and that she is now patient enough to explain to anyone who needs it. They take, she says. That is the thing about them. They will take everything you have, and they will think they have you. But the last thing is not a thing they understand. The last thing is the part you give away, the part you choose, the girl you pull out of a dumpster, the lullaby you hum in the dark, the cup you press into a stranger's hand, the hour you choose to live when you had chosen to die. That part, she says, that part they cannot have. She pours another cup. She hands it across. She says, in her own voice, in her own name, in the warm yellow light of her own kitchen on her own free world, drink something good. And the universe does its slow, impossible work, and the night moves on, and somewhere out in the dark another collar fails, another foot twitches in another dumpster, another tired man stops walking past. That is how it goes. That is how it has always gone. That is how, in the end, the long, quiet, patient, stubborn, impossible thing called humanity outlasts every empire that ever tried to take it. Nozdrowi.